It's about First Tech Federal Credit Union, Addison Avenue, and Raymond James.
Yeah, thanks, Callie. And thank you all for your time and the opportunity to speak with you today about financial wellness. Like Callie said, my name is Brian Culp. I'm a financial advisor at Addison Avenue, Raymond James, and First Tech Federal Credit Union. First Tech is a full-service credit union that offers a wide selection of banking products, everything from checking, savings accounts, mortgages, insurance solutions, and pretty much anything you're looking for. With over 20 billion in assets, either on deposit, investment, or advisement, First Tech remains one of the largest credit unions in the USA. Addison Avenue is the investment arm of First Tech and is responsible for the financial planning and wellness of our members at First Tech. We serve folks across the country and globally as well. My practice is located in Bellevue, Seattle, but again, we have members and clients spread across the country and the globe. And Addison Avenue is the single largest investment program of any credit union in the nation. We serve more than 13,000 families and advise over $4 billion. We've partnered with Raymond James. They're one of the largest brokerage firms outside of Wall Street. They're in St. Pete to provide investment management and physical wellness planning to our members. We have a great presentation for you today. It's designed to touch upon the various stages of financial development. Whether you're starting today, getting your financial house in order, or have more sophisticated needs, we can definitely take a deeper dive. And hopefully this call will help answer some of your immediate questions as they relate to markets today. I'll be available for any questions after the presentation or directly through email after the call. So thank you, and I'll pass it back to Molly.
Great, thanks so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We are thrilled to host this important and timely conversation on the Biden administration, priorities for the first 100 days in office, and the impacts of this policy agenda on the tech sector and for our member companies. My name is Molly Jones. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs here at WTIA. And as you may know, WTIA engages in public policy and advocacy on behalf of all of our members. And this webinar is part of our efforts to engage our broader membership in these policy conversations. So if that's something you're interested in learning more about, please do reach out, and I'd love to chat about that. I'm going to start by introducing our speakers, and then we'll moderate a discussion between them, and we'll then after that turn it over to the audience for Q&A. And of course, thank you to First Tech as well for their support of this event. So for our first panelist, Ed Mills joins us today from Raymond James, where he is the Managing Director and Washington Policy Analyst. He brings more than 15 years of experience working on financial markets, finance policy, and corporate tax policy. He's worked in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate, serving as professional staff member for the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Consumer Credit, as well as a policy advisor to Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney of New York. His analysis has been widely featured in prominent media outlets, and we're lucky to have him here with us today. So Ed, thank you. Our second panelist joins us from Washington, D.C. Jenny Schuch-Page is a principal at the Asia Group, where she leads support for the firm's clients navigating emerging trade, economic, and technology policies for large Fortune 500 companies to small startups across the Asia Pacific region. She has over 10 years of experience working on foreign policy issues, including living and working on the ground in Japan and in Indonesia. Prior to joining the Asia Group, Jenny served in several roles in the US State Department, and she also has a master's in international economics in Southeast Asia and China studies from the Johns Hopkins SICE program. So thank you, Ed and Jenny, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing your insights on these topics, and we'll jump in with questions. So first to Ed, presidential transition, over the past 2 months, we have witnessed one of the most consequential transitions of power in modern history. I would love to hear your assessment of the transition and this unprecedented landscape that the Biden administration will have to navigate.
Yeah, Molly, I think when we look at this transition is just starting. Traditionally, you do have a several-month period between the November election and the January 20th inauguration. The inability of President Trump to concede delayed the official start to the transition, as well as the Georgia runoffs, which were not settled until just a couple of weeks ago, really delayed the transition. When we look at the impact on technology, I first think about it in terms of personnel is policy. And when you are trying to decide who you are going to nominate during your transition period, you want to know who will get confirmed through the United States Senate. It's a very different group of individuals who can get confirmed now that Democrats have a majority in the Senate. Lots of conversations of, would Mitt Romney, would Susan Collins, a couple of the other more moderate Republicans within the Senate, if they could potentially support nominees. None of that matters unless you're even going to have a vote on the nominee to begin with. What we have seen over the last number of years, if Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, now the minority leader, didn't want to bring up a nominee, he didn't bring up a nominee. So going forward, the fact that Joe Biden is able to nominate anyone he wants, and he can be near guaranteed there will at least be a vote, what you'll see is a more formal infrastructure being established here in DC, a full complement at the Federal Trade Commission, really important on antitrust, privacy, consumer protections, a full complement at the Justice Department, an attorney general in an antitrust division fully staffed up. So the transition, it's still very much underway. We have only one confirmation. It was the director of national intelligence done as of this conversation this afternoon, but lots more to come and a pretty aggressive agenda to come once that transition is complete.
That's great. Thank you. Can you give us a sense of the timeline of how long you expect this confirmation process to take? And of those folks that we have seen identified, how prepared are they to hit the ground running?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the last part of that question first. Probably one of the biggest differences so far between the Trump administration and the Biden administration in terms of who is being selected. What we are seeing is a number of people who have worked at the agencies, who have long tenures in Washington, D.C., being chosen for these positions. That will bring with them a lot of experience, a lot of ability to hit the ground running. And it is a group of individuals who will want to get things done. There is a lot more uncertainty 4 years ago when it was a lot of outsiders coming in, people with no government experience, more opportunity to get some wild card events to occur. But working and living in DC, there is a learning curve and it is steep. And there is a big difference between wanting to do something in this town and being able to accomplish something in this town. In terms of getting individuals confirmed, I would expect the next month or so being focused on the high-level, cabinet-level positions, getting through the confirmation process. It's a simple majority in the Senate to get confirmed, but the minority still has the ability to delay votes through kind of waiting for nominations to ripen is the word we use here, and that's a different 30-hour process. So before we get a full complement at some of the agencies that we care about, be it the FCC, FTC, some of the Justice Department, I think it might be until mid-year this year before that is fully complemented. In the interim, those will be headed by acting directors. They can do some stuff, but it won't be everything until everyone is confirmed.
That's great. Thank you. That's really insightful. So, and thank you for setting that stage. With that background, as we look forward, tell us a bit about some of the top policy priorities for the Biden administration and where tech fits in.
So when I look at the Democratic agenda as a whole, and I always come back to this, if I want to use one word that describes a Democratic philosophy to governing, it's fairness. And there is a lot of concern that COVID, the civil unrest of last year, really exposed economic inequality, some of the divides that exist within this country from systemic racism. And so the overarching agenda is going to lead with how do we make the economy, how do we make technology more of a level platform in a more fair environment. A lot of that is going to be done through changes to the tax code, making sure that individuals, companies are quote unquote paying their fair share. We are going to be looking at potential internet regulation, going back to some conversations about net neutrality. Is the internet treating all providers and all users fairly? Is there privacy that is being protected? Are there algorithms in new developing technologies such as artificial intelligence that have racial biases? Is there too much concentration of power within certain tech companies? And therefore, we need to have more aggressive antitrust action against those companies to make the playing field for new entrants more fair. So if you kind of always look at it from, is there an issue that you think could impact your company? And is there an issue of fairness that a Democrat could bring up? It could be on the agenda under a Joe Biden administration.
So broadening beyond the tech basket for a minute, we saw some initial announcements kind of in President Biden's first day of office. Could you walk us through some of those announcements and what that might mean about the first 100-day agenda?
Yeah, so I think with the, Molly, the first 100 days really is trying to get COVID under control and making sure that we have effective vaccination campaigns, 100 million vaccinations within 100 days. That's aggressive, but it's doable. We see kind of a focus on economic recovery. And what we have seen in other selections, such as the selection of Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary, that's a really strong signal from this administration that they are going to care most about economic recovery in COVID recovery, part of the reopening trade, before they focus on regulation. One of the things when you talk to Democrats in Washington is they feel when President Obama took office, he did push for a stimulus bill that was about $900 billion. But ultimately, Democrats think that they asked for too little, and that the big problem is that they promised too much, delivered too little, and ultimately had a lot of unequal recovery coming out of the great financial crisis. And Democrats will draw a straight line between that unequal recovery and the ability of Donald Trump to come to power through a populist message. So their view right now is act big, go big. That's part of the $2 trillion package that Joe Biden released last week for fiscal recovery. Included in there is an additional $1,400 check to individuals, universal broadband, a lot of changes through tax policy, more money for paid sick leave, higher minimum wage, this economic fairness argument that I was discussing. And then after that, it's going to be a pivot towards infrastructure spending, as much as $4 trillion. So overall, if you boil down what the Biden administration would like to do, get control of COVID, spend a lot of money on an improving economy, and invest in the future, part of the Build Back Better. So overall, Washington, D.C. is going to spend a ton of money this year and through the administration. How much they try to raise in terms of taxes is a much bigger question. But what we are seeing from a market response is some inflation concerns being priced into the market, the Treasury yields having a rally as inflation is being priced in. And there has been a rotation trade in the markets more towards cyclical names, more towards financials. And sometimes when we kind of look at the models for tech companies, the terminal or the discount rate is being changed. And so sometimes the concern here is that multiples on some tech companies could be hit, or kind of tech companies could be a source of funds as these policies play out here in Washington, D.C.
Thanks so much, Ed. And, that's a very domestic agenda, but the world keeps moving. So Jenny, could you tell us a little bit about how the Biden administration is approaching foreign policy and where that fits into this broader landscape?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, Molly. It's great to be here with you today. So as Ed touched on, President Biden has outlined 4 immediate challenges he is focused on as he enters office, and they're all domestically focused. Containing COVID-19, repairing the economy, as mentioned, also dealing with climate change and addressing racial justice in the US. So while foreign policy isn't in that top list, we are likely to see a stronger nexus between domestic and foreign policy with this team. Biden and his initial appointees, they've all made clear that they really believe that by rebuilding America and strengthening our country at home, this will have a direct impact on our global standing and strengthen the long-term competitiveness of America and our ability to deal with today's global challenges. So the new team has said that they will be focused on reinvigorating America's diplomatic efforts around the world, restoring our relationships with our allies, rebuilding our credibility. So it's overall a much more cooperative approach. You saw Biden already in his first day in office rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. He rejoined the WHO. So already sending this signal to the world that America is back to cooperate and to contribute. But this shouldn't be viewed as some sort of going soft on foreign policy. The approach that the new team is signaling is also very grounded in a realistic view of the challenges that they're facing. From this growing rivalry with China, Russia, threats to the international system, and the impact that the tech revolution has been having in reshaping every aspect of our lives. So, and as if I can add one more thing, as Ed mentioned, personnel picks really do tell us a lot about policy. We've already seen a restructuring of the White House staff around this shift in policy priorities. So there are new people being selected for senior positions on global health, democracy and human rights, and cyber and emerging technology. And those all shift, they signal a shift in how the US is going to approach the world. And then geographically, just to touch on that, they are also expanding the team responsible for Asia and China, something that we're watching very closely. But this is something that they recognized that is incredibly important right now to handle Beijing's growing assertiveness abroad and its repression at home, and is going to be a priority going forward.
A great overview, Jenny. Thanks so much. And I think both of you touched upon this a little bit, and if I may dig a bit deeper on this policy is personnel piece. Ed, do you want to give us a sense on the domestic side of who are some folks we should be watching?
Yeah, so at the Federal Trade Commission, Becca Slaughter will be the acting FTC chair. She is a former staffer to Chuck Schumer, and is viewed as someone who has more of a history on privacy and consumer protection rather than antitrust. She did kind of support the recent action against Facebook. It was an interesting situation where that antitrust case came out from the chairman, who was appointed by Donald Trump, in the 2 Democratic commissioners there. At the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland is going to be the Attorney General. When I have spoken to Democrats and Republicans about this, Democrats are fine with Merrick Garland as AG. It's not something that gets them excited. Republicans are probably more excited about him, someone who is viewed as having a strong rule of law background, straight down the middle, someone who will probably aggressively pursue things, but is not going to be partisan. I'm watching more who is going to be the head of the antitrust division at the Department of Justice. Delahane left yesterday on Inauguration Day. A couple of names that have been out there. Terrell McSweeney is a former FTC commissioner. someone who is also focused on privacy and consumer protection, viewed as a top contender there. Susan Davies, a former deputy White House counsel under Obama, on that list. There's been some other dark horse candidates. I would expect what we have seen out of this administration so far is the top position being somewhat middle of the road or kind of more in line with a Joe Biden approach to the world. The next level down being much more aligned with the Democratic base and much more liberal, much more aggressive in their willingness to pursue things. It is this level, the next level down, that probably will be doing a lot of the work. So that personnel is policy, yet to be determined on a couple of them, but I'm expecting aggressive picks now that there is the ability to get anyone they want confirmed through the Senate with the Democratic majority.
Great, thank you, Ed. Jenny, looking to the same question on the international foreign policy side of things, we've seen a lot of big names enter the White House and the State Department, former Secretary of State going back in. Tell us a little bit about what's different this time and how some of that personnel will be shaping things.
Yeah, so I think what's really notable this time around is that Biden is picking people for his cabinet and senior appointments who have tremendous government experience already, and they're going to be able to hit the ground running on day one. So in the foreign policy realm, we're seeing a lot of familiar faces return from the Obama administration, and as well as the appointment of career diplomats to posts such as the director of the CIA even. And this has been intentional. Biden recognizes that with the many challenges facing the US right now, he has no time to lose and needs to bring in people who know what they're doing and can get started on day one. Biden has also been picking people, including for these top foreign policy jobs, who he has a long personal history with and really trusts. So for someone like Tony Blinken, who he's nominated for Secretary of State, who served as Deputy Secretary of State in the Obama era, Secretary Blinken will be more empowered to speak on behalf of the president and represent US policy abroad. So there will just be a much stronger connectivity between the White House and the State Department, which is really important for an effective foreign policy. In addition to that, President's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, he has been a close advisor to Biden throughout the campaign period and during the Obama administration. And then in addition to this, all of the top foreign policy team, they all have experience working constructively and cordially together in the past, which maybe doesn't seem like I need to say that, but it is really important. I think as we saw over the last 4 years, having these folks work together and work together towards a shared objective is going to be really valuable. So overall, it's going to be a high functioning team that can really leverage all parts of the government, utilize our career foreign service officers and career commercial service officers that can help US companies out in the world. And then
Jenny,
as you know,
isn't it? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, isn't it fascinating how, before kind of Biden was elected, there was all these conversations about there was going to be a big unity government and all the folks that had been running for president were going to be part of this. And we know some of these names, but I think most have been surprised at how often you have to Google who's just been appointed to some of these positions. And Biden hasn't picked anyone that's really a political rival, with the exception of his vice president and treasury.
No, really. I mean, Pete Buttigieg, transportation secretary. There's no one else that was a presidential candidate. I think there was a lot of speculation about who he might pick. And then after the election, he reverted back to who he knew and who he trusts. So Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin came out of nowhere. That wasn't on anyone's list, but they have a long relationship, and it's someone who he knows and trusts from General Austin's service during Iraq. So, similar to that, Secretary Kerry's appointment, as Molly noted, is very interesting. the special envoy for climate change, it does signal just how much of a priority this is going to be for the next administration. And it's also notable that it was elevated to be a cabinet level position for the first time. So Kerry is going to have a seat at the National Security Council, which is quite significant. He's going to be able to incorporate climate change issues into all aspects of our foreign policy. Similar to him, Samantha Power, who was nominated to be the head of our U.S. Agency for International Development, she is also going to have a cabinet rank. First time ever for this position. It's always been underneath the State Department. So this will really elevate her perspective and her voice. And yeah, she's not well known to most Americans, but she is a very strong advocate of human rights issues. So giving her that stronger voice is definitely going to influence our foreign policy.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say about Kerry is that he is one of the few picks that A, we all recognize, but B, does not require Senate confirmation. And it was done before we knew the outcome of the Georgia election. So it is a signal that climate change has significantly moved up the agenda, but getting anything through Congress, this includes a climate czar as well for Gina McCarthy, the former Environmental Protection Agency head under Obama. She was also put into a position that doesn't require Senate confirmation. So there is this tension that's there on some of these environmental issues of really important, but if you need the Senate, it's still probably not going to happen. And that to me is something to watch as Green New Deal and other climate related initiatives get debated in Washington over the next couple of years.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny and Ed, for that. I think you've both underscored pretty clearly that policy is personnel, and it'll be interesting to watch how these shake out. Jenny, you did mention China, and I know that's a top priority, or Asia broadly is a top priority for a lot of our members, both in terms of connectivity as well as terms of competition. Tell us a little bit about how the Biden administration is approaching the relationship with China, especially in the context of the past 4 years and any course correction that might be required.
Yeah, definitely. It's true. China is really already at the forefront of Biden's foreign policy agenda. What's interesting on China policy is that more so than for any other foreign policy issue, over the past few years, there's really emerged a nearly bipartisan consensus on China that the US needs to shift away from this the relatively collaborative and sanguine view of China that had characterized decades of our foreign policy and move to a more competitive and even confrontational approach going forward. So, that being said, we can still expect Biden's team to take, change some tactics from the approach of the last 4 years. The relationship is likely to become both more competitive, but also less confrontational, and the loud confrontation that was really constant. Most of the issues driving friction in the US-China relationship, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, technology and trade issues, those are all going to remain difficult issues. And Biden's China team has said they're not going to make any immediate moves to shift course. And that includes what they might do with regards to the tariffs that Trump put in place. But there's going to be a policy review, already started to, rethink how we approach China. And I think we can, one big part of this that we can expect to see on all these areas of friction with China, the administration is going to be much more focused on working with our allies to put pressure on Beijing collectively. So it is more of a united front with our partners. So we're not likely to see any major reset in the relationship in the near term. Biden has said that he thinks it's still possible to work with China on issues of shared concern. So we could see some discrete areas of cooperation emerge on issues like global health with the pandemic, climate change, nuclear proliferation. But it is, the team that is being put in place in the White House and in the Pentagon, they are all, fairly hard-nosed on China and take a competitive view to the relationship. So they are preparing for that approach.
Great. Along the lines of China on the trade topic is also important for our membership. And we saw it really become a lightning rod, very politicized issue in the Trump administration, where these bilateral relationships have become more transactional and trade focused over the past 4 years, kind of leaving behind some of the softer diplomacy elements. So maybe Ed, we'll start with you and then turn to Jenny, but where does the Biden administration go from here? And what do you think the trade priorities will be?
Yeah, I think Jenny did a great job explaining kind of a lot of these dynamics and how bipartisan they are. And I do think that one of the hallmarks that will lead the Biden administration is on human rights. We got a lot of questions earlier this week when there was a statement by the State Department about genocide of Uyghurs within China and how big of a deal that ultimately is. And that is important, but I think it is something that Democrats probably would have led with a lot more than the Trump administration. The Trump administration was far more transactional. Trump's worldview was one in which trade deficits and tariffs were his leading concern. I think that for the near term, assume status quo, which is a pretty elevated position between tensions in the United States and China, and that more medium term, there will be a high-level delegation of Chinese officials that come to the United States, and that will set the tone for the near to medium term relationship. I do think that there is this desire to regain alliances. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, there was a lot more kind of propaganda about what that was versus what it actually was. That was the world coming together and setting standards on China and kind of working together to try to have a set of fair trading rules. Even Trump himself, in the middle of some of the China trade fights, said, well, maybe we shouldn't have withdrawn from the TPP. Nah, I like bilateral approaches. So I think there will be a return to this multilateral approach. Human rights will be an important focus. A lot of the issues that have been highlighted by Donald Trump do have bipartisan support in Washington, D.C. So the risk that I see near term as well would be if Biden tries to walk anything back, be very watchful of Congress. They easily could come in and force him not to do something. The only time we saw any check on Trump in the last couple of years as it relates to China is when Congress wanted him to get tougher. In politics, when you're explaining, you're losing. Biden doesn't want to explain anything about any walk back on China. It's just a politically losing issue for him. And therefore, I don't expect it to happen, especially with the hawks that Jenny highlighted that are in the administration.
Jenny, anything to add on the trade piece?
Yeah. So, I think honestly, trade is not going to be a top priority in this immediate period ahead. The president has so many crises at home that he's going to be focused on, and I think rolling out his Buy America plan is going to be a big priority, because when he talks about trade, he's always talked about it in a way that's very much about how does it benefit American workers. So there's going to be a discussion about reshoring some critical supply chains and thinking more about the American worker and how they factor into our trade agreements. So, I think as Ed mentioned, we are going to see the administration, quickly lower the temperature with regard to the foreign trade disputes and cease with the aggressive approach of trade wars on all fronts. So this will probably include some changing of tactics with regards to Europe, removing some of the tariffs that we've put on allies, like related to steel and aluminum, and revisiting the trade war with China and pivoting there. But when it comes to trade talks with China, I would say, rather than the approach in the past 4 years of trying to secure headline deals on US exports, the new team is going to be more focused on addressing the structural impediments to trade and addressing China's unfair trade practices, so as to support US exports and hold China accountable. And I think this is going to be much more beneficial for companies, in the tech sector in particular. So there will also be, I think, similar to human rights, as Ed mentioned, but there's also going to be a focus on labor and environmental standards in any future trade talks. That's something that is mentioned a lot by Democrats when they criticize deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And yeah, I would say, agree with Ed, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to be an area where there is going to be pressure on the Biden administration. He has said that, he will not rejoin it as it's currently written, but would consider it if it is renegotiated. And I think, there are some areas like labor and environmental standards that would need to be upgraded. But, generally, I think trade in Asia and how the administration takes a proactive agenda to that is going to be really important for US companies. Last year, we saw, a big 15-country agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, saw that signed without the US, but with China, Japan, many of our other partners. So, it's less ambitious than the normal trade agreements we would go for. But it was a diplomatic achievement for China. And China has also said since then that they would like to join the TPP, which Trump pulled the US out of. So this is, definitely going to be an important area going forward. I would also just note, given this audience, that, I do think that there's going to be a focus in the trade agenda and how the US competes globally on tech issues. And more emphasis on digital trade, which would, increasing focus on data issues in these trade agreements, increasing the specificity of how those issues are discussed in trade agreements. So I think our, US Trade Office is going to be busier in that realm. So whether that's strengthening rules for data governance and limiting restrictions on cross-border data flows, that will be an interesting area for how the US approaches on trade.
That's great.
And just, I guess, real quickly there, I think one thing that was really interesting to me over the last couple of years is this idea that our technological assets are national security assets in this country. And that was a fundamental shift. And we saw changes to the process for allowing foreign investment in U.S. companies through the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States, CFIUS, updated. When I worked on Capitol Hill, this was back in 2007, I helped put that CFIUS regime into law for the first time. We didn't even consider technology really as something, even in a post 9/11 world, to be included. We've seen Congress step up and say, the Commerce Department should identify emerging technologies, foundational technologies, and there should be export controls on this. Everything we've seen with Huawei over the last couple of years is this idea that if we have technology, we have someone who is a potential adversary, i.e. China, we should be very cautious in terms of what access we give to them. And so those digital privacy, walling off data, cutting edge, anything that is emerging, anything that is foundational, is going to have a national security view first, not just a commercial view that we've generally had. Something to really watch to see how much Biden continues that trend.
That's great, thank you. And I would just say a plug for Washington State. We, amid the global conversations on data protection, data privacy, there's a state law under development in our state and in front of the legislature right now that intends to set a strong national standard on that. I do want to make sure we have some time to cover immigration. This is access to H-1B visas is important for our members and the tech sector workforce more broadly. Ed, could you tell us a little bit about what we can expect on immigration and visas?
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at policy, there's a lot of criticism about how the Senate is dysfunctional in the 60 vote thresholds for filibusters in the Senate to be overcome before things occur. What I generally have said is that that historically has allowed for any issue that has about 70% support among the American people to get through the Senate. And we've seen that consistently. There are a couple of exceptions. Gun control laws has been one of those hurdles that hasn't been able to clear that threshold. And immigration reform has been one of those issues that has not been able to clear that threshold. There is an expectation that the Biden administration is going to lead with immigration reform. I think it is still an uphill battle to get the necessary 60 votes in the Senate to do this, but I'm looking more at executive orders. There was already an executive order that kind of changed some of the restrictions on HB1 visas put in place by the Trump administration, by the Biden administration in the last 24 hours. There is a desire to kind of have a pathway to citizenship for those who are undocumented in the country. There was a last minute executive change at the Department of Housing and Urban Development for DACA recipients that allows DACA recipients to be eligible for federally backed mortgages. So I think what we're going to see is a real pivot towards solutions rather than increasing kind of the divide in this country and using immigration as a wedge issue. I think most of the things that get done are probably through executive order. There will be a push in Congress to expand the number of HB1 visas and other visas. I think that is more likely than not to get bipartisan support. The comprehensive reform, there'll be a lot of headlines, but I usually have not lost a lot of bets in DC by betting on inaction or things taking longer than people would like to see. So better headlines on it. We'll see if there's better outcomes.
Thanks, Ed. So I would encourage folks, if you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat. I see we have one now, which is great, but we are saving time for a few more than that. So please put that in the chat. And my closing question to you both, we covered a lot of ground today, but would love to kind of give you a chance to close with some of the key tech trends we should be watching and what you think will be significant in the year ahead. Ed, why don't you start?
Okay. So, I mean, I think that, we are at a moment of big change in Washington, D.C. We have this general view with very closely divided Congresses, 60 vote thresholds in the Senate for legislation to pass, that the actions that we are going to see could be limited. However, there is a fundamental shift that is going to be putting pressure on Democrats to deliver. And those do include ensuring that some biases and privacy issues are addressed within technology. Antitrust is dealt with. One thing on antitrust that I think we should really understand the shift in DC is that for years, it has been based upon the impact on the consumer. And I think a lot of folks in tech will look at their product and says, this is cheaper for the consumer if they use this. This is better for the consumer if they use this. This is adding, benefits to the consumer's life, and therefore there can't be an antitrust concern. That's not what our antitrust laws say. If you go to the statutes themselves, the antitrust laws were developed because we want checks and balances in this country. That's what our democracy is founded on, is checks and balances. And so what we are seeing with the case against Facebook, what we saw with the Department of Justice going after Visa in their planned acquisition of Plaid, is for the first time in a long time, the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, is taking on antitrust cases and calling individual companies monopolies. And they are trying to block or unwind the acquisition of nascent competitors. If they are successful, there will be a re-rating in the value of all tech companies out there, not only those who can buy, but what would the purchase price be if some of these buyers that have really dominated the space go away. This has not been settled yet, but that truly is the new frontier that regulators and the Democratic base and quite frankly, the Republican base is pushing for in DC, is that tech companies have gotten too big and have too much of a dominant space in purchasing nascent competitors. And for checks and balances in this country, using existing law is how we work to solve that problem.
Jenny?
Yeah, I can take the foreign policy take on that. I think we're already seeing that technology issues are going to feature a lot in really some critical policy discussions over the coming year, whether that's in bilateral relationships, where tech issues are manifesting, or as we seek to strengthen how the international system can deal with and handle with some of these pressing issues coming out of emerging technologies. And this is really just inevitable given how tech intersects with so much of our national security and our international economic interests. So whether that is going to be export controls on sensitive technologies, CFIUS concerns, as Ed mentioned, cybersecurity, which is already, being signaled as a top priority, setting standards for emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. I think we'll see movement there. Restoring critical supply chains. And so what does what are those critical goods that the US wants to be made more securely in the United States, which, part of that is medical equipment, but part of it is also technology. And then deploying 5G, the ongoing issues that we've been grappling with vis-a-vis Huawei globally. So these are all going to be important issues for both the future of our economy and our global leadership on innovation and technology. And they're going to be areas where the administration will look to work with our allies and our partners to develop common strategies and solutions. But there will also be a lot of areas of friction with our adversaries on tech issues. So for all of these, and especially as they intersect with trade and exports and manufacturing and supply chains, it's going to be really important for the private sector and groups like this to given your leading role in driving the tech agenda and actual innovation, it'll be important to have a seat at the table and engage with policymakers and share those experiences and best practices and have a voice in how these policies are developed, especially during the first year.
That's awesome. Thank you both so much. I'm going to turn now to the chat for a couple of questions. We have one from Penelope Harwood. Thank you, Penelope, for the question. She said, can you comment on foreign policy toward Europe and the UK?
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at that. Yeah, I think, just broadly speaking, we can expect those relationships to get better. Biden is very focused on improving relations with allies. So that is the EU and the UK and key players like Germany and others. And I would also say that, a lot of the top officials that are being, selected for key posts, they have long-standing ties with Europe. I would say more than any other region. Folks like our incoming Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and others at the White House and in the Pentagon, they have spent decades on Europe issues and, have those relationships and the trust. And, I think it positions us really well to be restoring those relationships.
Agreed.
Well, it looks like that was the extent of the questions. I'm not surprised because your overviews were extremely thorough and interesting. So thank you both so much. If we were live, we would all clap right now, but But on behalf of WTIA, thank you so much for your time and for those great insights. It's really valuable for us and for our membership.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. This was great questions, and people really need to stick with what you're doing at WTIA and kind of all the policy issues, because they're going to have a big impact. I've been doing this for 20 years. It's only in the last year or two where these issues really have gone over to investors, where they care a lot, because it is starting to impact multiples, impact the bottom line. So staying on top of this is going to be crucial, at least for the next 2 to 4 years.
Thanks as well. As a Washingtonian at heart, it's been a pleasure to be with this group. So thanks for hosting this discussion, Molly, and look forward to staying